This is my dad, Billy Mahoney. A lot of his friends called him Bill. He was a family man, good provider, good father, good grandfather. He was always there when you needed him. He was married for over 60 years. To his grandchildren, great-nieces and nephews, he was their papi. My father was a very charismatic personality. He made no apologies, though. You either liked him or you didn't. And if you liked him, you loved him. And if you didn't like him, you despised him. Born in 1925, my father graduated high school at the age of 14. Not too long after his 15th birthday, he somehow joined the Air Force. As a young man, my father had an opportunity to see the world. Unfortunately, because it was wartime, he saw a lot of action too. In the military, my father flourished in an engineering capacity until he was later trained to pilot a plane on a bet between white officers that blacks weren't capable of flying an aircraft. He was part of bomber crews even before the Tuskegee Airmen flew. On one mission he was shot down and was a POW in a Japanese camp. He was honorably discharged from military service in 1951. Around the mid-50s he became a Philadelphia police officer and a member of the Highway Patrol, and eventually became the first black to pilot the city's police helicopter. He retired from the police force in the latter 60s and eventually landed a job with Boeing Vertol, their helicopter division. My father was a good politician, even back then, and he eventually worked his way up the corporate ladder as the director of functional testing for the highly secretive V-22 project. He was recognized many times by senior management and won innumerable awards. He would often fly to Seattle to have lunch with the president of Boeing. Although the president of the company assured him he could remain in his position for life, my dad retired in the latter 90s. Along his journey through life, regardless of what path my father took, he always made a friend along the way. He worked all his life and was his own self-made man. He saved and invested well. He always lived life to the fullest, so why should his golden years be any different? During his retirement, my parents began to travel extensively. He always wanted a boat, so he bought himself a 40-foot Silverton. He even bought himself a Rolls Royce. Life was good for my parents, but my dad had an urgent sense that he needed to contribute to something bigger than himself. My father had no hobbies, so at first retirement seemed a little daunting to him. Within a few short years after retiring from Boeing, he joined an advocacy organization comprised of retired black police officers called the Sentinels of Law Enforcement. He eventually became president of the group and held the position for multiple terms. Since my father was a very charismatic fellow, he got around and networked with many advocacies, politicians, and activists. He was very popular on the political scene. He actively sought out other law enforcement organizations and functioned in some sort of capacity as spokesman or co-chair or vice chair. He served as co-chairman for NABLEO, the National Organization of Black Executive Officers, and the vice chairman for NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement. Over the years, he concurrently held various senior level positions with multiple law enforcement organizations. He He was even part of an international law enforcement committee. My father was a master at leveraging the very public visibility of the various affiliations that he had across law enforcement. He eventually created a strong power base for himself and his constituency. Dad was highly respected and well liked by just about everyone. He became a mentor to many high-ranking officials. He lobbied many of the different facets of law enforcement for votes during election time. He knew exactly when to leverage those votes along with the chips that he was carrying in his back pocket. He was personal friends with many influential people, including 2 former governors, Governor Florio of New Jersey and Governor Rendell of Pennsylvania. Many political figures may have disagreed with my father publicly, but behind closed doors they considered him a close friend. It's hard not to like him. After all, he's the best dressed guy in the room. As you can see from some of the photographs, my father had excellent taste and a great sense of style. True sartorial excellence. Often my father would participate in charitable events that would entail a fashion show, in which he would insist upon wearing his own clothing. In 2006, at the age of 81, my father, along with his partner, Cliff Lowry, formed a private security service that specialized in security and bodyguard services for political dignitaries. My father was pretty shrewd. He timed the formation of his services with the election period in Pennsylvania and in Philadelphia, so that even the candidates were using his services. My father kept an aggressive schedule, meeting with various people and speaking at various venues, yet he always took time out to listen to every little complaint and be that champion for the little guy. For quite some time as my father aged, the family urged him to slow down some of his activities and speaking engagements, but he felt a sense of obligation to meet every committed date, and regardless of how he was feeling, he always showed up. If there was any kind of wrong that was done and a person needed a voice, he was their voice. He was there to honor fallen heroes in law enforcement. He was there to support anyone who needed support. And although he was heavily covered in the media, both television and in print, he wasn't there for headlines. He was there to make a difference. And he did for so many. On June 10th of 2013, I think God was very pleased with my father's life's work, particularly the last decade and a half of his life, in which he gave so much of himself, perhaps out of a sense of obligation, or perhaps out of just a good-natured individual. So at that point, I think God allowed my father to rest, So he passed away at home in his sleep, peacefully. There was no illness, no suffering. It was only tranquility. He had told me once that I had some really big shoes to fill, and he was right. He made such an impression on me, more so than he ever realized. On July 2nd of this year, the Guardian Civic League and Fraternal Order of Police honored my father and his multiple contributions to not only law enforcement, but to justice, liberty, civil rights, and education. Pennsylvania State Representative Vanessa Brown, a close and dear family friend, honored him with inclusion in the Pennsylvania legislature. She said that Billy Mahoney was a great Pennsylvanian and a son of Philadelphia. Yes, he was, but to me, he was my dad, and a hell of a father. I love you, Dad, and miss you.